Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Really hope that you're enjoying reading the Lizzy Albright and the Attic Window book. It's very exciting for Ricky and I to be launching this with you. It's very exciting for us to let you have this sneak preview. I know many of you are loyal Ricky Timms fans, as am I. And this is just such a fun, in my opinion, sneak peek of the process of going through this whole thing, and we are really loving sharing this with you. Chapter 8.
Yeah.
I'm so excited because we are now getting into the adventure part of our book. And let me tell you, Ricky and I had so much fun letting our imaginations go wild. And even when it's your imagination, things kind of have to make sense. And that's harder than it sounds.
Yeah, so I'll chime in to say I have had this from the beginning about plausibility. Yes, it's a
Right.
fantasy, but I have stayed really on cat about, well, we don't want to try to force the situation. We don't want to try to, well, if this, then this, and then if they did that, and then maybe it would have been, people would buy it. I've really stuck to
Yeah.
plausibility. I know it's a fantasy. We're going to have a girl and a goose. The book shows that on the front cover, but nonetheless, it still needs to feel plausible to me. And I also just want to remind everybody that what you're listening to is the pre-final. There will be a few changes yet, so you're kind of getting a little bit privileged information. And chapter 8, things really do ramp up right now. So here we go.
Yeah.
Chapter 8. Tap, tap, tap. Lizzy was sleeping peacefully. She was dreaming that she was walking through a beautiful forest when she came upon a red door that was blocking the path in front of her. She rapped on the door, but nobody answered. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Still nobody answered. She began to feel anxious. She needed to go through to the other side, so she knocked louder. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. The persistent tapping brought Lizzy closer to reality. She became vaguely aware of a tapping noise in her room. Groggily, she opened one eye and looked around the room. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. She looked over to the window and realized that the snow had turned to ice and it was now pelting against the window panes. She pondered briefly and found it amusing that noises in the real world could become part of dreams and sound different from how they sound when she is awake. She closed her eyes and smiled as she imagined the enchanted winter scene that she would expect to see outside her window the next morning. Feeling the comfort and warmth of the quilt, she quickly fell back asleep. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Gruff, gruff. McDougal's gruffing caused Lizzy to stir. She pulled a second pillow over her head to muffle the sound and tried to go back to sleep. Tap, tap, tap. Gruff. This gruff was louder and more closely resembled a bark. It was loud enough that Lizzy woke up and looked at McDougal. Gruff. What is it, McDou? Tap, tap, tap. Gruff. The tapping sound was louder than she had originally realized. McDougal was sitting just outside her door, intently focused on something down the hall. Tap, tap, tap. Grrr. This time McDougal gave a soft, long growl. Lizzy now realized that the tapping was not being created by an ice storm, and she was too awake and too curious to ignore it. She got out of bed, walked to the door, stood next to McDougal, and looked down the hall. Tap, tap, tap. What is it, McDou? Lizzy whispered. McDougal glanced at Lizzy. He slowly approached the opening to the stairway that led to the attic door. He stopped and gruffed again. Tap, tap, tap. It seemed to Lizzy that the taps were coming from the attic, but she wasn't sure. The entire situation had her spooked, and then she remembered the rumors that were spread about ghosts living in the McHale mansion. This thought only made matters worse. Tap, tap, tap. McDougal whined, acted agitated, and then gruffed again. Lizzy, speaking as quietly as she could, said, Okay, McDou, if you will go with me and attack any ghosts, we can find out what this tapping is all about." MacDougall stretched out his front legs and lowered his chest to the floor. Lizzy perceived his bow to be a sign of affirmation, but then he shook his head in such a way that she couldn't exactly tell if it was a yes or a no. Lizzy had to know what was causing the tapping. Being cautious and apprehensive, she tiptoed up the stairs and cracked open the attic door. Tap, tap, tap. It was louder. "You were right, MacDoo. The sound is coming from the attic." As she opened the door a little wider, MacDougall squeezed his head through her legs and peeked into the room. He gave a serious, low, rumbling growl. "Shh! You're going to wake up the whole house." Tap, tap, tap. It finally dawned on Lizzy that her brothers might be up to one of their typical pranks. Right after they had moved into their new house on Juniper Lane, the boys went to her bedroom and tied a clear fishing line to one of her favorite stuffed animals, a large giraffe. Once Lizzy went to bed, they planned on making the giraffe scoot across the floor, which would no doubt frighten her. Fortunately, Lizzy saw the line before they went to sleep and realized what they were planning to do. When the lights were out, she quickly arranged the pillows under the covers to make it look like she was still in bed. She grabbed her flashlight, patted lightly across the carpet, positioned herself just behind her bedroom door, and waited patiently. As soon as the house was quiet, the boys snuck out of their rooms and met in the hall. They took the line and started slowly pulling the giraffe toward the door. When it got to the threshold and nothing happened, they suspected that they were too late and that Lizzy must have already fallen asleep. They cautiously peeked their heads through the doorway, and from the glow of the nightlight they could see that Lizzy was asleep in her bed. "She's out like a light," whispered Doug. "Let's put it back. Then we can hoot like an owl and see if that will wake her up." "Okay, go put it back," said Alan. "No, you go put it back," argued Doug. "I'm not going to put it back. I'm going to be the owl." This went on back and forth with neither of them wanting to go into the room. They finally agreed that if they were going to do it, they would have to do it together. They took hold of the giraffe and slowly and quietly began carrying it back into the room. They shuffled right past Lizzy, who was frozen in place and breathing as quietly as she could. As soon as they had passed the doorway and were in the room, she slammed the door, jumped from her hiding place, and shouted, "Gotcha!" shining the flashlight in their faces at the same time. The boys jumped right out of their skins. They were so startled that they screamed, tripped over each other, and tumbled to the floor. Alan banged his elbow on the footboard of Lizzy's bed, and while scrambling to get back on his feet, he kicked Doug in the sensitive part of his crotch, making him howl. He rolled on the floor in agony. Lizzy laughed so hard that her sides hurt. They looked like two floundering, whimpering fools. I got you good," laughed Lizzy. The boys' egos were crushed by the fact that their little sister had managed to beat them at their own game. Plus, they were embarrassed that they had been so terrified that they actually screamed. Defeated, they left the room. Lizzy was still laughing as they walked down the hall. Mr. and Mrs. Albright had heard the commotion and figured out the gist of what had transpired. "Maggie, I think I'll just let this one play out on its own. No need for us to intervene." Mr. and Mrs. Albright both laughed and shook their heads. Lizzy went to sleep that night with a smile on her face. It was a smile of contentment, like she had never known before. She had won this round, and that was enough satisfaction for now. Tap, tap, tap. "I bet this is another one of Doug and Alan's scary pranks," Lizzy whispered to MacDougall. "Okay, tapping noise. I hear you. I've got my attack dog ready to pounce. You'd best be moving along now." She purposefully began speaking a little louder, partly to convince herself she wasn't scared, and partly to alert her brothers that she was on to them. The boys rarely went to the attic and did not know it as well as she did. She knew every nook and cranny. The light switch was just inside the door. But since her eyes were already adjusted to the darkness, she decided that it would be best to leave the lights off, giving her the better advantage should there be any confrontation. Besides, the street lamps outside provided enough light through the attic window that Lizzy could see nearly everything in the room. Tap, tap, tap. MacDougall suddenly darted between Lizzy's legs and bolted toward the attic window. He jumped up on the cedar chest and barked vigorously. "What is it, MacDou?" Lizzy asked, cautiously walking toward him. She had left the door open in the event she needed a quick escape. Lizzy looked toward the window and saw the silhouette of something moving. She put aside the notion that her brothers were up to something. They would not be outside on the roof for any reason at all, especially in this weather. However, Lizzy had not yet ruled out the possibility of it being a ghost. "I bet it's just a tree branch hitting the window," Lizzy said softly as she continued toward the cedar chest. The silhouette moved again, and then the shape became undeniably clear. There, sitting just outside the window, on the overhang of the roof, was a goose. Tap, tap, tap. "Oh, no," said Lizzy. "It's my goose. The poor thing didn't find his family. He needs help." MacDougall started jumping up and down, running in circles and barking. Tap, tap, tap. Lizzy needed to get closer to make sure her eyes were not playing tricks on her. She crawled up on top of the cedar chest, cupped her hands around her face, and peered through the window pane. Indeed, it was a goose, and now they were eye to eye. Tap, tap, tap. This time the tapping was so close and so unexpected it made her jump. "MacDou, what can we do? We have to help. Look at all the snow outside. We have to let it in." MacDougall barked in agreement. Lizzy found the window latch and switched it to the unlocked position. She pulled the handle, but the window wouldn't budge. "The window is stuck," cried Lizzy. "Try again." Lizzy gripped the handles as hard as she could and pulled. "It won't open. It's really stuck." "It's not stuck. You just have to open it." Lizzy took a deep breath, gritted her teeth, and yanked as hard as she could. The window flew open with such ease that she fell backwards and toppled off the cedar chest. A blast of frigid, howling wind shot through the window, sending swirls of snow flying into the room. Lizzy climbed back onto the top of the cedar chest, and the goose stuck its head through the window. "I told you it wasn't stuck." Lizzy's eyes nearly popped out of her head. She wasn't sure if she really heard what she thought she heard. Baffled and stunned, she asked, "Did you say something?" "The window. I told you it wasn't really stuck." The winter storm blustery winds forced more snow through the window. Lizzy was bewildered and astonished that she could understand what the goose said, but she was at a total loss for what to say or do. She just sat there, looking at the goose, frozen. "Gruff! Pardon me, lass, but maybe ye should be asking Mrs. Goose if she's lost or if she's needin' any assistance." Lizzy instantly looked down to MacDougall and then around the room to see who said this. She didn't see anyone, so she looked back to the floor where MacDougall was sitting, wagging his tail and looking directly at her. "MacDou, did you just say something?" "There's a goose peeking through the window, lass. Did ye open the window and let your manners go blowing away on the wind?" chastised MacDougall. This was unreal. There were now two animals talking to her, and she understood both of them. It was a fact she was trying very hard to deny, and it made her think she must be dreaming. But what she couldn't deny was the biting, bitter wind and snow. It was very cold and very real. "Lizzy, my name is Greta," said the goose. Lizzy looked back to the window, too stunned to even acknowledge that the goose knew her name. "Are you lost? Can I help you?" "No, I'm not lost at all," replied Greta. "But yes, you most certainly can help me. We are in desperate need of your help." A gust of wind whooshed through the window, causing a lamp to crash to the floor. "You talk people talk?" Lizzy was having to speak louder in order to be heard above the gale. More snow ushered in through the window. Yes, yes, of course, or maybe you speak animal talk. Whichever it is, it's not important right now. But you must come with me, Princess. Time is running out, and we desperately need you. Princess? Lizzy looked around the attic again to see who Greta might be talking to. Are you talking to me? Lizzy was having to shout above the blasting gusts. I'm not a princess. What do you mean, come with you? How? Why? Who are you? Lizzy was riddling Greta with questions. I'll explain everything soon, but we must be on our way. The entire kingdom is depending on you, and time is of the essence. We've been looking for you for a very long time. Please, come with me. I promise you'll be safe. The wind was becoming more fierce. The door to the attic slammed shut. Snow was building up on top of the cedar chest and drifting onto the floor. Lizzy's hair was starting to freeze from blowing snow, and the icy wind and sleet were beginning to burn her face. She was so miserable that she felt that she needed to shut the window, or she would surely die. Please don't shut the window, pleaded Greta, as if somehow she knew what Lizzy was thinking. It's cold inside, but it's wonderful out here. Climb out the window. Get on my back. Come with me, shouted Greta. What do you mean, get on your back? I'm a girl. You're a goose. I'm too big. The wind blew her words back into her mouth so they couldn't escape. Princess, please hurry. It will all make sense soon. Lass, would ye go if I were to go with ye? I'll be putting up me mitts if anyone were to try to bring ye any harm. The force of the wind blew the other attic window open and brought twice as much snow into the attic. It swirled with such vigor that the room began to look like a snow globe. McDougal raced to pull the red cloak from the hat rack where Lizzy had left it. You might be a-needin' this to keep you warm. Lizzy reached over and took the cloak. She wrapped it around her shoulders and fastened the collar. The cloak warmed her slightly, which calmed her a bit. I'll get in trouble. This is crazy, Lizzy thought. The force of the wind caused the tails of the cloak to fly up, flap, and flutter. She couldn't stand the wind and ice any longer. She looked back over her shoulder and saw that the entire attic was now filled with snow. She could only see the very top of the old divan. The cedar chest was completely hidden. A snowdrift was pressing up against the door, holding it shut. I promise you'll be safe. Take a leap of faith, Princess. I'm right behind you, lass. Lizzy began to crawl out the attic window. She hoisted herself one leg at a time through the window and sat on the sill. Get on my back, Greta was shouting, but the wind was roaring so loud that Lizzy didn't understand her plea. What? Asked Lizzy. I can't hear you. Lizzy held tight. She could no longer hear nor see. Her hair was whipping in every direction. Pelting ice forced her eyes shut. The wind was now so fierce and loud that it almost blew her back into the attic. Jump! McDougal barked at Lizzy from behind. Jump! She heard McDougal, and without thinking, she pushed herself up and leapt blindly out into the storm. Her arms were flailing, and she felt herself sliding down the roof. She screamed. She was falling. She kept on screaming. She kept on falling. She felt a hint of warmth on her face, and she was finally able to open her eyes. She wasn't falling. She was flying. Lizzy found herself nestled into the soft, warm feathers of Greta's back, with McDougal snuggled under her arm. Are you getting warm? Asked Greta. It's amazing. Yes, I'm very comfortable, thank you. Lizzy felt tremendous relief. I've never felt so free in all my life. As Lizzy looked at the snowy landscape below, she was no longer astonished or bewildered. She was simply filled with wonderment. She was amazed. She felt courageous and confident. She felt hopeful and free. And better than that, she was flying. Miss Greta, McDougal called out. Yes, Mr. McDougal. It seems we haven't formally met yet, but I'm McDougal, which it seems ye already know, and you're Miss Greta, which I already know. It's a pleasure to meet ye." "It's a pleasure to meet you too, Mr. McDougal." "But I do need to tell ye," said Mr. McDougal. "What's that?" asked Greta. "I'll be keeping a beady eye on ye. I won't be allowing any tomfoolery." "All right, Mr. McDougal, all right. No tomfoolery." The sky was clear and filled with twinkling, brilliant stars. Lizzy began to recognize a few of the constellations. The air was brisk and cold, brisk enough that each of them could see their breath, but not so cold that it was uncomfortable. Lizzy squeezed McDougal tightly to her chest. "There's the Big Dipper," she pointed. "And that one, all by itself? I think it's the North Star. Are we flying north, Greta?" Lizzy asked. "Yes, Princess, we are." Greta continued to ascend. The moon was full and bright. Lizzy began to see colors of light up ahead. "Are those the northern lights?" asked Lizzy. "They most certainly are. Look how they dance in the night sky." "Wow, I've always wanted to see them. They're beautiful." As they approached the colorful wisps of light, Lizzy saw them begin to swirl. The misty hues began to assemble and form into a tunnel. Greta flew directly toward it. When they entered the tunnel, they were enveloped by stars that rotated around the tunnel, creating a vortex of light. Lizzy had never seen anything so magical. Greta stopped flapping her wings. She was able to rest as the light carried her on. The tunnel slowly narrowed, which caused them to accelerate. As they came to the end of the tunnel, the stars flashed, then vanished. They were floating through an endless void of total darkness. One by one, Lizzy began to see stars appear. The blackness shimmered and twinkled as more stars fell into place. Lizzy looked for the Big Dipper. Even though she didn't find it, everything felt familiar, like she was home. In her wildest dreams, she never could have imagined what she had just experienced. Greta began slowly flapping her wings with a gentle, steady rhythm. After a while, the cool night air, Greta's soft feathers, and the soothing sound of a gentle breeze lulled Lizzy to sleep.
Well, hello, Greta. Not a
Yay.
not a Mr. Goose. It's a Miss Goose, and her name is Greta. And McDougal with his Scottish brogue accent, and Lizzy just in a whirlwind of a snowstorm. I call that scene the snow globe because that's how I picture it in my mind.
Yes. Flurries everywhere, for sure. I remember, attics, man, they could be the scariest place ever. And I just love how Lizzy embraces it and makes it her playground. And it's an exciting adventure every time she goes up there, and she's not afraid at all. I just love that strength. But she is afraid to jump on a goose's back.
Yeah, well, wouldn't we all? And who wants to climb out a window in a snowstorm? And then, of course, I mean, she may not be afraid of the attic, but she was afraid of her brother's pranks. At least she was prepared for those. And so off she goes through the window, through the tunnel of stars on the back of Greta the Goose. But I love that moment. And every time that we've described this book, we pretty much talk about everything up to Lizzy getting out the attic window. And so what people have never heard is what's coming. Turning the page. Yeah, turning the page as to what's happening next. And what do you have to tell somebody about fair warning on turning the page?
Oh, there's no warning. I say go for it.
Yeah, all right. So you guys, when we come back, we will turn that page, and all I can tell you is that when you start listening, don't think that you've suddenly got your chapters out of order. It really is the next chapter. It'll be confusing for a minute, but that's okay.